to that. Of course, in our terms, we might see them now as rather ambivalent. On the one hand, they did like this kind of normal life that they were also in rebellion against. But it's the rebel side that we remember now as having a certain importance, a real significance here. Okay, so I might share with you, in regard to, first of all, this paper, why I got into it, why get into Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And it was because of a personal experience I had with it, not because of some general interest. I wanted to do a follow-up to a paper I shared here in the club. When was that, a few months ago, Roger?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly.
Probably 4 months now.
Yeah, maybe about 4 months ago, called The Double, and I wanted to write something that was kind of a follow-up to that would involve the same theme. That is another Jungian analytic paper versus the books that I'll get into commenting on next month and the following month. These are Jungian papers here. Tonight's on Frankenstein. Unpublished, I sent it to one place, but I can't remember now exactly where I sent it. They didn't like it, they sent it back. They were not interested in it. It was not. At that, I lost interest in wanting to interface with the publishing world around these themes at that point, so I didn't try and work on that further, or work with any of the further possibilities around that. So it's remained like this all this time. And you can imagine, certainly at the time, this remains since the case, that Frankenstein is presented. Here I have a couple of examples of the text itself. Thank you. Here is the original Frankenstein. This is newly out, for example. Okay. They present it as if it was just these themes that this guy says in the beginning of his thing. You can read it, the story, in all these different kinds of ways that I alluded to before. And there's no mention of anything below the belt. You'd think that people were just normal people like everyone else, and there was this weird monster. But actually, believe it or not, if one follows the history I'm sorry, next thing on stories now. If one follows the history of these texts, this is actually a rebuttal to this book. This came out in 2007. This is 2010. This is the traditional book, but it's very sophisticated. You notice it has a very slight color tone, meaning it's taken the original handwritten manuscripts. There's a library, the Bodleian Library back in England. And the scholar's gone to the damn library, and he's pulled out the damn manuscript. And the first part, the lighter color, is the novel, where the actual handwritten text of this version of the text, which is the earliest, they proposed earlier versions of the text which are now lost, not available anywhere that anyone's found, okay? But this version of the text has gone back and forth from Mary to Percy, and Percy to Mary, and Mary to Percy. And so this guy has taken out all of Percy and left just Mary. And the Mary text is the slightly darker text. This is a little more, and this is an attempt to answer this man's criticism. This is John Loretson, an old gay writer, gay rights writer, gay and interested writer, very interested, who has written the man who wrote Frankenstein, where he proposes it was Percy Shelley who wrote Frankenstein. And Mary was just cooperating, more like a secretary or something. And I must say, he's very opposed to what he feels was a second-rate talent being claimed as the actual creator of the work. And unfortunately, he gets into a technical fight about all these technicals and who technically actually wrote what was this core thing, this second thing here, which this guy says is this manuscript with all the Percy Bysshe's changes and marks and stuff taken out. This guy says that that original thing that this guy has as a second thing was mainly work that had been developed between the two of them, went back and forth on that level, and then she made a clean copy of it. Well, he points out And then this one continues, things even later, but continues the tradition. You just don't wonder about that. He acknowledges that this clean copy that he's now got the second half written by Mary, okay, in her hand, okay, he claims was written by her, and therefore she created the novel, right? And then he acknowledges that it would go back and forth, and she'd write in her room for a while. They were stuck because of the rain, it turned out, in Switzerland, their house. This is what created these stories. And it would go back from his bedroom to her. They were moderns. So they had separate bedrooms. So go from his bedroom to her bedroom to his bedroom to her bedroom. Evidently, they all testify to this, right? And this guy then claims, he says, oh, this guy's wrong. He was wrong because everyone said she wrote it. Well, it wasn't her hand. And he says it was in her hand because she finally wrote up a clean copy. They made such a mess of it. And this guy and the whole tradition doesn't take any account of that. Well, this is, believe it or not, this is 2007, okay? It says 30 years after I wrote my paper, okay, someone says in print, this novel is about homosexual persons. So being a homosexual, and what happens if you try and do that, you better forget it. I mean, it doesn't give up. The spirit of trying to be that way doesn't give up, and it leads to the story of the tale, right? And in his opinion, whether or not, in my opinion, whether or not all the technicals were whatever they were in terms of its creation, physically, it's a story about trying to be a gay man when that was not allowed, and you are hungry, you really crave to be accepted by society. You really want, maybe you are in an upper economic position, like Dr. Frankenstein would have been, but let's say you're gay. So the normal thing at that time, either you lived in exile, you went away and just disappeared, and you went into exile, and you weren't considered acceptable in normal society, or you lived a lie. There was no other way. Even 100 years later, people would face death if they did not lie. Look what happened to Oscar Wilde. He was crushed and destroyed 100 years later. Okay, then this novel, for attempting to live an honest life. Okay? So I found it really, really interesting that after I'd written this discussion of that point, on this point, from a Jungian point of view, this guy comes along and writes about it in that way. He's not psychological, so doesn't take a psychological attitude about it, but making the same point. And the people continue to, as they do with other people, like Lincoln, for example, this has gone on, and other people. For example, the paper, I'm going to share it with you, the paper if we ever get to it, mentions Kafka in there, and that refers to an early work of research about Kafka that all kinds of later research was disputing, and there was all kinds of stuff about that. And rest assured, the Kafka situation is much more complex than presented in this old paper. The old paper is very simple in these matters, but the underlying themes are of the nature that I'm mentioning here. And I found it really, really interesting to see this 30 years later, this point of view mirrored about what was going on in the novel Frankenstein. On whether or not Percy Bysshe Shelley wrote it or not, I have the sense that it turns out his second wife, Mary, was very interested in this cause that he devoted his life to and that others around him were struggling with. They were interested in being queer themselves, all of them, to an extent that wasn't a more purely kind of homosexuality in our sense. I think that might have evolved over time for them, you know, as they worked and developed this kind of stuff. But it was very advanced for the time. I think Mary Shelley was trying to work with her husband in a political sense, like they were comrades together in producing this, what at the time was extremely heretical work. When it's read as an allegory, and you don't read it the way these these kind of the stupid idiots like this person pretends they're strict readers and that's all humanity is. And that's all humanity amounts to. So that's what this book is about, rather than what's much more likely. So I wanted to share that as a little bit of an intellectual background. So that's not how I got involved in it personally, even though I was looking around for some of the reason after I wrote this article on the double. The reason I still love Frankenstein is I had an odd personal experience with the story that kept coming back to me later on. So I wanted to understand it better, because it had earlier on it had sparked me to go in this whole more gay-centered kind of direction. And I've related that incident before. This is like the fall of 1974, I think it was. God, man, I was in a terrible mood. I was in this awful state. I was horrifyingly depressed and out of it. Awful things had happened. My lover had left me. The school I was in the master's program, they rejected my master's thesis. I got my revenge. I turned it into this book, and then they know what we're talking about next night. But they took one look at it. I was turning out. They went, "Ah!" They refused to do it. I had to write a new master's thesis. I was in a terrible funk at this pickle. I wasn't going to graduate unless I figured this thing out. I couldn't figure out what to do. And I was just morose and collapsed, and I was just funked out. And I was sitting in the living room. I don't know where I was. And I was in this place. I was renting a room with these two single lesbian mothers who shared a flat in Berkeley at the time. And I was in the kind of living room. They were at work. The kids were in these places where they got parked during the day while my mom's worked. And I was alone there. And the TV just happened to be on. And I wasn't paying it much attention. I didn't have it on. The purpose of it just have something on. I was like, is there something there? You got something going on. I was feeling really awful. I was kind of caught in it, feeling icky, But I gradually began to notice what was on the TV, because they were showing the Frankenstein. There was some version of this Frankenstein story, and they'd reached the point where the doctor had created his creature. It was all wrapped up in all these very long bandaged things, like a mummy kind of thing, all wrapped up, and was getting shocked with that electricity. Like that. That's always kind of slightly interesting. So I started to pay attention to it. So the mummy thing was up on some high area, and it got lowered down. Obviously, some imitation of the original movies, which all involved electricity, very lovely high to low movement and everything. So the creature gets that, and then the doctor steps up to the creature and starts to unwrap these bandages. So I had seen a lot of Frankenstein monster movies by then. This one I had not seen. This is new to TV, just written, and it turned out I didn't know this. And I'd seen a lot of them, and it wasn't very much to expect normally, because they all tended to be variations or copies of the original. So when this bandage started to show this tawny hair and this face, it didn't look like anything monstrous at all. It was this cute guy. And it was just so different than what I ever had seen or known. It didn't matter how it kept going. The thing was like almost negative. So it was a little tiny thing. I was like, God, they're really playing up this. What's really hidden here? Whoa! It was like, whoa! I never got over that scene. The story kept going, of course. It was like a shock. It caused something to get shocked internally, I would say. And it felt to me that the shock was that what I expected to be so despicable, or attempted to be shown as despicable, which is the point of the story, which I have not read it to that yet, which is the ugliness is really caused by the way in which something is seen. that be when it looks like it's